Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Five Drinks to Midnight. Another show we bring the questions, guests bring the drinks. We try to wrap up before midnight. It's our final show of 2022, and we got a good one. We're talking to Tim Grimes, the senior brand ambassador for Templeton Distillery. But before we get started, hit all the likes, the subscribes. They'll really help us out. Let's get started. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Five drinks or midnight, five drinks, five questions, midnight, whatever comes first. How you doing today, sir?
I'm wonderful, Tim. And yourself?
I'm good. You know,
Right on.
it's getting cold and snowy, and it's it's perfect drinking weather. So I'm excited to crack open a few things with you tonight. So
I'm excited to do the same, man.
I guess our first thing, what are we drinking first?
Yeah, I thought we'd start off with an old fashioned, a classic cocktail. Since obviously I work for Templeton Distillery. We love our rye. I think that an old fashioned is the cocktail to have with rye whiskey.
Agreed.
So I thought it was appropriate that we started off with a super classic like that.
Agreed. Well, cheers.
Here's to you.
Oh, that's good shit.
Baby.
I agree. The old fashioned is an absolute perfect. What makes it? Why do you think it's an actual perfect cocktail?
Sugar, water, bitters, and lemon was actually the actual citrus that they added to that original old fashioned, which we use orange today, and that's what I used. I don't know about yourself. I think you used orange as well.
And then we're using a 4-year-old in this. So can you tell us a little bit about the 4-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our classic whiskey, Templeton 4-year-old, and I guess we've switched bottles, and I should have brought it down. I guess I have them kind of hiding behind me, but for those who aren't familiar, and this is the 6-year bottle original, but we switched from this older bottle style, which is what we started our brand off with, and used for close to 14 years. And we just rebranded and we came out with this brand new packaging. But this is our classic 4-year-old. And the reason we're making this old fashioned with this is because, first of all, it's the driest product we make, actually. We're going to try our range of rye whiskeys today. So we're going to do 5 whiskeys, including this one. But I chose to do this one as a cocktail because for me, and especially in an old fashioned is a sweet cocktail, right? It's a simple cocktail, but it's sweet. It's got that sugar in it. It's got a little bit of that fruit like we were talking about. But because of that sugar content, you need a whiskey that actually has kind of a dry quality to it. And that's why there's a big debate in the whiskey world, right? Over, do you put bourbon in or do you put rye whiskey?
Right.
Well, the original old fashioned had rye whiskey in it. I mean, rye was America's whiskey first, right? Before bourbon existed. So you've got that, but the reason is rye also has that. Not only is it dry, but it also has that spicy pop to it that bites and it cuts through that sweetness also. So for me, it's a perfect cocktail. Matter of fact, we have a really great craft cocktail bar here in town called the Winchester.
It's connected. Why do you think there's a rifle above the bar? Because the pub's called the Winchester. Exactly.
And I just removed an old favorite, and I don't want to get into that too much, but an old favorite bourbon off of that cocktail. And it wasn't until we really tried, and it's a top-selling bourbon, I'll just say that. And we did a side-by-side, and the bartenders did it exactly right. We put them out. I used my Templeton 4-year and 6-year, and we used that competitive whiskey. And then we did we threw another one in there that was just I think a random one. Anyways, we made them exactly the same. And I mean, to the T, right? He didn't add an ounce of the simple syrup was the same. Actually, I can't remember if he muddled sugar in there or not. I think it was simple syrup. Anyways, everything was exactly the same. Nothing was out of balance. The rye whiskey, the 4-year in particular, shined. It always has, and it's because it cuts through it. Our 6-year, some people like boozier cocktails. This is a boozy cocktail also by nature, but guess what? You can add as much as you want to it or not. This is an 80 proof whiskey. By today's standards, when we released this 16 years ago, this was the Kitty's Meow. People loved it. They didn't even identify with it necessarily as rye, right? People 16 years ago didn't think about rye whiskey versus bourbon. I mean, it wasn't, that community wasn't that cultured yet, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So it was just whiskey. Hell, people thought it was bourbon, quite frankly. But that rye, in a cocktail like this, I don't want to go off on a tangent, is just ideal for this kind of a cocktail. Same with the classics. If you make a Sazerac, a Manhattan, if you go Manhattan, I guess Manhattan's the exception. I would use one of my boozier ryes in the Manhattan. I do like where it shines, but this 80 proof rye is perfect.
Awesome.
And that's the other thing. Today's, as you know, in the whiskey world, and we're going to drink some high proof whiskeys. High proof whiskey is trending, right? That's where it's at, because with proof comes flavor.
Yep.
So, and I'll never argue that fact. But I am personally, I've been in the business for over 30 years. And so I'm a longtime drinker, and I've loved a lot of different beverages, but I've always loved whiskey. And for me, I'm coming back to low proof actually right now, which is another reason why I wanted to highlight this in a cocktail. Because the reality is with cocktails is I want to be able to have several cocktails. I want to be able to function. I want to be able to talk to people.
Yeah.
And if you have 3 barrel strength old fashions,
You're fucked.
I'm not doing well. Yeah, you're totally screwed, right? So that's another reason why I wanted to also feature this, because it is an 80 proof rye that's phenomenal.
All right. So question 1, you talked a little bit about it. You've got 30 years in the whiskey business. A little bit of an origin story. How'd you get started in the whiskey business?
The origin story is actually, depending on how far back you want to go, I started, I'll give you, I started off actually, when I was in college, I worked in a grocery store. And in Iowa, we have liquor stores, but in some states you have to have a package store or a liquor store. In Iowa, liquor was available in the grocery store. So I was in college and found myself in charge of the alcohol aisle. So I think the manager he had his fist on the beer. And then I was given wine, actually, is where I got my start, and fell in love with wine. That is actually my origin story, is working as a retailer, falling in love with wine in that wine side, and ended up, I didn't know, when I was in school, I was a communications major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. The only reason I was a communications major is because I could have a radio show, and I don't have a radio voice at all. And so I ended up, after college, I went in, I applied for all these wine positions and worked for a wine wholesaler eventually, and worked in the wine trade for 3 different wholesalers over 3 years or so. And cut to the chase, love wine today. I'm still a wine drinker. I don't drink whiskey exclusively. But the thing was as a wine drinker, my favorite beverage when I came home was whiskey. That's what I had fun with. That's what I enjoyed, because I couldn't drink wine all day for work and then come home, and I didn't continue on doing that, right? I needed to switch gears. So I found myself drinking whiskey and falling in love with whiskey. Got lucky, and I knew I was going to transition one day. I didn't know if I wanted to work for a wine company or if I was going to get lucky enough and work for a distillery. And quite frankly, I thought I was going to stay in the wine industry.
Okay.
As soon as my kids went off, my oldest went off to college. My youngest is getting ready to graduate, and ended up having an opportunity. I stumbled onto this job, actually.
All right.
My predecessor, who was there since the beginning, moved on to another distillery. And I guess I'll say I saw my boss interviewing for the job. I guess it's a fun part of the story, right? I'm in one of my accounts, and my boss, my new boss, who was a coworker of mine and was now my boss and a good friend today, was interviewing in this account that I was in. I'm like, and it ends up that he's interviewing with the CFO of the company. And she's got a Templeton Rye jacket on, not much different than what I have on right now. And it's all not making sense because it's in a wine exclusive account.
Okay.
And they both have a look of like, oh my God, what's he doing here? Which I'm just doing my job.
Right.
Find out he didn't take the job. And I immediately said, hey, do you mind if I look into that? Turned out it was a wonderful fit. I interviewed, fell in love with the company because the company had, we're 16 years old now, going to be 17 years old next year. But Templeton's seen a bunch of peaks and valleys in those times, right? And I was really excited to be able to work for a distillery. And quite frankly, it's the only one in the state of Iowa where I could stay here, work for them. Plus, I loved the product to begin with. And it was kind of just a natural fit for me. And I knew I wanted to make that jump and that progression, and interviewed, got the job, and the rest is history. So I've been with the company for 4 years now.
Wow.
Long time whiskey drinker. But
that's awesome. I find it really fascinating. Like the people that are in like the whiskey community either kind of come, like engineers seem to like want to be like engineer pharmaceutical people, and they end up being distillers. And then
right.
like other people end up being like wine people. Like everybody like is always like, my first start is in wine. Like, I mean, we interviewed Kate Gerwin, and Kate was like, I want to be in wine.
Yep.
Mark Carter was, I want to be in wine. Like it's just like all this thing, and then all of a sudden now they're slinging whiskey or making whiskey. So I think like it's
what's interesting for people that were in the wine trade, especially, and you're right about the engineers getting into that distilling side. It's kind of interesting. I don't know why it works out that way. I think it's the brain that goes along with it. But the wine side, I see so many, and when I do my education pieces, I tend to make a lot of wine analogies, actually, because whiskey and wine, there are a lot of, from flavor profiles, nosing a whiskey, finding out how, detecting flavors and studying it. I look at it the same way I did wine for my entire career. And that was my whole thing. One of my things that I was good at was wine education, dinners, pairings, working with chefs. That was seamless to me in the whiskey world. And quite frankly, even 4 or 5 years ago, whiskey pairings, and I guess whiskey is going through the same kind of growth pattern and renaissance that wine went through. Wine's already peaked and is actually kind of going down, right? Whiskey is just like wine in that everybody's discovered it. Now today, everyone knows something about whiskey. If you're a whiskey lover, right?
Yeah.
You don't, people really honestly didn't know the difference between bourbon and rye. Seriously, 10 years ago, that was a whole different conversation. It really was. Something as simple as that. Or what's whiskey, or what's scotch, and they thought it was all the same thing. So it's really fun to be a part of this industry, and to have that wine background actually was really a positive for me, and made it kind of seamless, actually.
That's awesome.
Plus, I love the product.
Yeah. I mean, again, whatever's in your glass is your favorite right now. So
right, absolutely. And I'll just say it. I love wine today. I mean, I absolutely have a passion for it. So
that's awesome. Well, I think that's a pretty damn good origin story. So cheers to you. Like that's
right on.
All right. Question 2, drink 2. What are we drinking?
All right, we are drinking Templeton Rye, 6-year rye. So
Awesome.
Obviously the 4 years a little different, 6-year, two more years in the bottle, or 2 more years in the barrel rather. 91.5 proof. So we're off of that. We're off of the 80 proof, but we're still under 100, right? So 91.5. This is, while 4-year is easily our biggest seller, but that's also about price. It's about availability, but mostly that is a price-driven whiskey to quality, right? The 4-year. What we're finding is our 6-year is creeping right up to, and we think it's going to surpass our 4-year here in the next year or so in terms of sales. And and it's like I said before, 4-year is all about using it behind the bar. It's a great vehicle for cocktails, right? 6-year, now you can start drinking it neat on the rocks and enjoying it like you would any other whiskey. It's a little more elevated, and for about $10 more in price is all you're talking about, which is why we're seeing a lot of people shifting, even bartenders, to our 6-year.
Okay.
What I want is bartenders to have both the 4 and the 6 on that back bar, right? Use that 4 for those classic cocktails, but then use 6 for something a little boozier. But if you give this a go, so I had mentioned, love this neat, right? You're going to see, well, we had a cocktail first. I should have put the 4-year in another glass, but much different color. You know what? I do have another glass here.
Also, thank you so much for the samples. I really appreciate it.
Oh, for sure.
For some reason, I had a real hard time tracking you guys down. So I really appreciate the samples.
So I'll just hold these up, and I don't know if it'll translate on here. I kind of need a white background, but you can kind of see the color difference.
Oh, yeah.
4-year is right here, and then this is our 6-year. So you're jumping up 2 more years of age, and about 11% proof. It's 91.5. But you get loads more flavor. I mean, if you smell this thing, you're getting those burnt sugars, vanilla. One thing you'll notice about Templeton, we do have a floral note across the board, and you'll always get kind of a grainy quality on the nose, I think. That's a personal opinion. But you can tell this is going to be sweet. So where the 4-year, to me, if we were drinking it neat, you would consider that it would have that rye pop, that rye spice, it would bite you, and you'd feel the dryness, even though it has those sweet flavors in the background. 6-year, right away, it's tip of your tongue, it's sweet.
All right, well, cheers.
Cheers. So what's interesting, and I asked you to grab an ice cube for this one.
Yep.
And the reason why is this is one product where I actually tell people, throw an ice cube in your 6-year, whether you're an ice guy or not. But there's a lot of talk in the whiskey world. Water and ice, they have their place, right? It's all about portions. I threw a little cube in. But this is the one whiskey out of all the whiskeys we're going to drink today that if we add a little ice to it, which dilutes it a little bit, but that chill takes it's a 91.5 proof that tastes a little bit hot right away, right? The heat kind of comes and bites you, even though it's sweet on the tip of your tongue. This dulls that out. This takes that heat away. And if you smell it now, I get more of like a buttered popcorn note.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. To me, it changes. It makes these sweet aromas kind of pop out. And the same thing translates onto the palate. I get sweeter flavors. And I think it's just because by nature, ice kind of dulls down the heat of alcohol.
Oh, yeah. This is movie corn popcorn. Like, this is like.
Exactly. Right. So you get that like buttered popcorn that you don't get when you don't add the ice to it. So it's one of those fun things. It's like really obvious. I don't know if you've ever done like a Riedel wine tasting in the glasses and you try all the different varietals and you have that epiphany. This is one of those whiskeys where if you add the ice to it, for me, I had an epiphany and I'm like, wow, I can really see how this really affects the whiskey in my glass and changes it. Or maybe you've had Templeton. We've been around long enough now that maybe you haven't had it in a long time. You come back to it. This is what I would ask you to go and start off with. It's easy to go, hey, drink our 10-year, drink our barrel proof, strength and all that. But drink 6-year because it's great. And by the way, for cocktails, for those boozier ones like Manhattan, especially, right?
Yeah.
This is perfect. You get the alcohol, but you're going to get those big, sweet, rich notes.
Yeah, this a Manhattan like that, like with a little garnish of popcorn on the that would be just
yeah.
That's all. Like I'm getting so much butter now. Like right off the bat, like I was getting a lot of floral, and I really enjoyed it.
Right.
Then you add the ice, and now all I'm just getting is just sweet butter. Like that is just like I
mean, it's almost oily in your mouth.
Yeah.
Enough,
Oh, it's really good. Like honestly, I would never have added ice to it, but now that you said that, like that is just, but like a good hard shake in a cocktail and then strain, that would have been
bingo.
Absolutely.
Exactly. That's exactly how to do it.
Yep. Oh, that's amazing. Like that.
So it's a fun whiskey. It's really fun. But so a lot of people who aren't big whiskey drinkers, when I'm doing tastings, and they're kind of new to whiskey, and then they go to the 6-year and they're like, ooh, that's too hot for me.
Yeah.
And I'm, or that's got too much alcohol. I'm like, here, add an ice cube. And they're like, oh, well, I'm told not to do that. And it's like, no, just do it,
Yeah.
and enjoy it. And they do, and they have the experience like, okay, now I get it. So, and that's another thing, just like the whole proof game right now, there are a lot of haters out there. They're like, absolutely not going to add ice to my whiskey. You're out of your effing mind. Or water even. I mean, they just won't do it.
Yeah.
And that same guy, by the way, is the guy that only drinks barrel strength. So.
Yeah. And he just looks at his bottles. He actually doesn't open them.
Right, exactly.
We usually save talking shit for question 3, but question 2, we're already into it. So
Okay, I'll hold on.
No, it's good. It's okay.
Just a big difference between that 4-year and that 6-year rye. 4 years, what we made our name on. And it's funny. So when that whiskey first came out, people lost their minds. There were only a handful of ryes. If you go back in time to when we released this, it was 2006. Templeton Rye, just to give you a little history or background, just a tiny bit, about the brand itself. We started off as a brand, not as a distillery. It's not like we have some great old roots that we can talk about. But our story as a distillery didn't start till 2006. We were just a brand prior to that. And or excuse me, I take it back. In 2006, we weren't even that. We didn't have those history, the roots of having a distillery back in the day that we've revived. We just became a brand in 2006. But with that, there were a handful of ryes in the market at that time, right? I mean, and when I say a handful, like Rittenhouse was kind of the champ, at least in Iowa.
Yeah.
I think Rittenhouse sold around 15 cases annually. That's it. I mean, this was like the worst business model you could ever come up with. A whiskey, one SKU, that was rye, by the way.
Yeah.
Horrible fucking idea, right? Guess what? It wasn't, because, and when you taste Templeton 4-year, back then it blew people's minds. Sweet. It was accessible. It was so smooth. It delivered all this flavor that it still does today, but in our high proof world and with all these flavors and the whiskey, the competitive set now is so massive. There are so many, as you know, there are just so many brands out there, right? That now we are one of many. But back then it was like we stood out.
Yeah. And
for whatever reason, people didn't know it. People to this day, in some cases, but especially just even a few years ago, were like, I love your bourbon. I love your bourbon so much. And I don't have the heart to change, go, yeah, you mean our rye? I'm not going to be that dick. No, you mean rye, unless I can work it in subtly. But people didn't distinguish. It was just it was what we became as a brand: smooth, easy drinking. Flavor first, quality first. Those were things that were really, really important to us then, and they are today. So, but 6-year is kind of what I kind of wanted to be when we first came out with the brand.
Okay.
But we were releasing 4-year whiskey. But like I said, we were really releasing something between 4 and 6. It was around a 5-year plus whiskey. And that's really what people love, which is why I also think that this is hitting the sweet spot, if you will.
You kind of mentioned it, but like even getting like a rye in the Midwest, because like rye is like an East Coast thing too. Like, so
right. Very much.
Like to all of a sudden be like, oh, here we are, we make rye, and like it's just all of a sudden like rye is popping up all over the Midwest. And I think that's absolutely amazing as well. So that's
it's funny because I get this question a lot, which is, do you use Iowa Rye? Because originally, and a matter of fact, what we're drinking today is MGP still distillate, right? So we opened our new distillery in 2016 is when we built the distillery that we are today, right? Started as a brand in 2006, but 2016 is when we actually erected the distillery, and we started distilling. So we actually have product that's about 4.5 years old now. So we are at that, we've been in purgatory for a little while, just waiting to get our Iowa distillate out there. But I will tell you that the product that we have, the product that we're making is outstanding. But the question I get all the time is, are you using Iowa Rye? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. Back in the day, and you're right, it was an East Coast thing because settlers came over, they settled on the East Coast, they brought the rye with them, and they planted rye. right? That's the deal. Guess what? Corn grows all around. We live in Iowa. We are a corn state.
Corn,
right? We are literally surrounded by cornfields at the distillery. No joke. It's corn everywhere you can see, which is kind of funny. But back in the day, they did have rye planted. So I mean, Templeton in its original form, which was an illegal brand back in the day. I don't know if you have a question about history stuff, but I don't want to jump ahead.
No, please.
Okay.
All right. Tell us all about it. Yeah, like that.
Templeton was a bootleg product, right? It was a brand. It was an illegal brand, or before it was ever a true brand today, before we made it a real brand. It was never a distillery, like I was mentioning before. So Templeton was just yeast, water, rye, and sugar. Now, rye by our standards today in Iowa, it just doesn't meet it. And trust me, we have some wonderful farmers that bring us rye. And I do these tours. Sometimes I do virtual tours where I do these screen shares things. And, and I always include some of the farmers that have brought us some of their rye samples. And I actually address that and talk about it. And we had some farmers from Sioux City, Iowa, which is in northwestern Iowa. It's about the closest rye we'd ever had that Lester had brought to me. And he's our master blender, head distiller. And it was the closest sample of rye that we think we had ever had that was like, this is pretty good. There's no way they could have given us enough or supplied us enough. So we buy all of our rye from Canada. It used to be Germany and Canada, but now it's just Canada, just so you know. Wisconsin is where we get our malted barley from.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so right, home state there.
Home state.
But people think, they want to know. I always ask about Iowa rye, and the reality is, our climate's horrible, and why they made it and had it back in the day by today's standards, it just doesn't cut.
Again, Midwest, like it's alfalfa, mint, and like corn, like that is like
corn and soybeans dominate.
Yeah.
Right. I do drive by rye fields and wheat fields sometimes, which is kind of interesting. They're very rare, but when I do, I definitely notice them. I'm like, oh shit, I wonder if that's any good.
Pull over and steel fuel stocks.
Right. Like, I can run back to the distillery. Look what I found.
It's growing.
We can make 10 bottles with this.
All right. So question 2.
Yes.
So again, you guys have had a long history in the community. Again, like you said, it started as bootlegging. You're going in, and you guys actually have the motto of small town strong spirits, or a strong community spirit, which again I think is absolutely amazing, because again, like a lot of the things that is talked about is like what you guys are doing for the community. I guess the big question is, what does that motto mean for you personally, and how does that reflect on the brand?
Sure. Good question. And the reality is that motto, we just changed that tagline when we rebranded. We were known as the good stuff, which is what Templeton was referred to back in the day. But the reality today, in modern times, with this modern distillery, is the reason Templeton exists as a distillery today and as a brand is because we wanted to honor that tradition and that heritage of making spirits and honoring the town of Templeton and the people of Templeton, who have this proud, rich history. And it's an amazing history and story that ties back. It's an American story. It's not just Iowa, and it's not just the town of Templeton or Carroll County, which is the county that Templeton's within. So to better illustrate this, or to talk about it, can I give some historical background?
Yeah, please. Yeah, absolutely.
So, to best kind of tell the story, it's the reason Templeton as a brand exists is with that tagline in mind, is we wanted to honor the people that worked so hard, because quite frankly, if it weren't for Prohibition and if it weren't for bootlegging whiskey, the town may or may not be there today. If you know anything about most people understand that rural communities across the country are fading. They're not getting bigger.
Yeah.
Right. So Templeton is a small town in western Iowa with a population of 362 people today. At its peak, it was 400. So the town's history goes back to 1882 is when the town was actually founded and started. It has a history that is basically German Catholics settled in the area. The Chicago-Milwaukee Railroad was built and cut right through. The town of Templeton was actually down just a couple miles down the road, and they changed the location to where it is today because of the railroad coming through. Because about every 10 miles, if you think about a locomotive back in the day, it was coal with steam, and you had to have a stop where there was water, they could refill, and it was a steam-driven engine. So that was where the town ended up starting up, was right there where the train would stop and the train station would come in. German immigrants. The town was primarily German Catholic. So if you go to the gravesite in Templeton, it's all like Kirchhoffs and Schultz, and it's like, it's all German names, right? But it makes sense. So when you think about German and Catholic heritage and what that means, you have beer makers, right? You have people who understand beverages, winemaking, beer making, all of that. It's a part of their culture, always has been, still is today. But they are the people who settled in that area, and with them came that history of actually making beer, and the town actually had a German and English newspaper. There was more German spoke in that town than anything.
Okay.
If you want to really dive into it, there were 3 churches, 4 pubs with 400 people. They loved to drink, right? But there were 3 different churches, and 2 of them were Protestant. If you know anything about history, the Protestant religion, they were the ones that were pro-prohibition. They were anti-drinking. Iowa in the late 1800s actually was a dry state, and there were only a handful of counties. Carroll County, and where Templeton was one of those counties that was a wet county. This is in the late 1800s. Can I dive into the Prohibition stuff?
Please, yes.
Okay, all right.
You can talk about whatever you would. Like, again, this is fascinating. So look, you could do not hold back. You can talk about whatever you want, because again,
right on. There's so much history and so much to talk about that I don't want to. If I'm off base, reel me in.
No.
But speaking to Prohibition, what's interesting about Iowa Prohibition, because this is actually a story that while it's about Iowa, and like I was mentioning before, it's also about our country, right? And the reason why is there was a lot of bootlegging going on in rural Iowa, which no one thinks about. When they think about Prohibition, they think about Al Capone, they think about Chicago, they think about New York, San Francisco.
Yeah,
right? That's what you think of when you think of Prohibition. You don't think of a farm in the middle of nowhere with guys making whiskey in this town, because the story ties back into your question, which was about that small town strong spirit, which is you've got a community of people that are struggling post World War I, right? So World War I ended in around 1918. Prohibition was 1920. There was a farm crisis around there, and then you went into the Great Depression. Something amazing about our area, and I'm not going to say just Templeton, but Templeton was kind of the heartbeat of what's called Carroll County. Carroll County is the greater county that Templeton's within. Templeton's a town within Carroll County. And that area was, during that time, very wealthy and had money. And I shouldn't say very wealthy at that time. They're a wealthy community even today. But the reason why is nobody lost their farms during the farm crisis, which happened across the country. People weren't losing their money. They weren't losing their farms. They were bootlegging whiskey, because remember, we were a mostly dry state early on. Here's another interesting fact about Prohibition. We were ahead of the rest of the country. So in 1916, the state made a statewide prohibition. Prior to 1920, 1920 is when the U.S. Across the country, we enacted Prohibition. 1920 to 1933, right? We were ahead almost 4 to 5 years ahead of that curve. And honestly, about 50 years ahead of that in the state, because most of the state was dry, with only a handful of those counties being wet. So what's my point? My point is that you had these people, these German Catholics who were settled in this area. They had been making beer primarily which ended up turning into making spirits, because if you know anything about making whiskey, it's making beer up to a certain point, right? You just keep distilling it further and then you become whiskey. So they had that skill set. They had a really good guy in town who was who could make stills for them. And long story short, this is where that strong town or small town strong spirit comes into play, is everybody, and I'm not shitting you, everybody was involved in bootlegging. If you weren't making it, you were supporting someone. The person who ran the telephones would let somebody know that, you know, you've got agents coming in. There was a town south of just south, the biggest town south of Templeton is called Audubon. Audubon had a federal agent that was there that was hell-bent on busting everybody. And he was really close by. And he was going to Des Moines, Iowa, which is the capital, which is about an hour and a half away, busting people. But he was right by Templeton. And the point is everyone was working really, really hard. Sheriff was involved. The mayor was also a pharmacist. He ended up he's like, I'm done being a mayor. I'm a pharmacist. If you think about it, he was prescribing whiskey, right? And which then turned into, I'm just going to bootleg it. So everybody had a hand in it. So to illustrate this further, the story further, is there was a guy named Joe Earlbeck. Joe Earlbeck was the kingpin of the area. So his home is still in the town right there. Beautiful little brick home. And Joe Earlbeck was our big bootlegger. And the reason I say that he was the kingpin is he was so famous for making his stuff, he couldn't keep up with, you know, the demand versus production was out of whack. He needed to have people help him. So he ended up getting people to make whiskey for him. They were called setters. Those setters would then make whiskey for him. Joe's deal was, look, if you get busted, don't rat me out. I'm paying your bail. And that's what he did. Joe bailed people out if they got busted, and they did it. So if you think about it, you're in a rural community. There were a lot of hog barns. There were chicken coops. That's where people were making whiskey under those, because hog barns, if you know anything about distilling, with, you know, spent grain and that distillation process smells kind of like a hog farm.
Yep.
So a lot of people don't realize that. When you walk in the distillery, it's grainy. It's this beautiful, like, smells like grape nuts, right?
Yeah.
But the distillation process, when you're cooking, it smells like a hog farm. So when you were making that, first of all, you're in a rural area, so that smell isn't bothering anybody. If you're in downtown Des Moines, in a which is our capital city, in the city, well, that someone's going to smell that and know what's going on. Yeah. So being out there is perfect. You can hide that smell because you've got hogs there. You're in the middle of nowhere, so you can see feds coming, first of all.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that was happening. People were looking out for one another. And I'll tell you, there's a great book called Gentlemen Bootleggers. Matter of fact, it's a guy in New York that wrote the book, Rice Bauer. You can get it on Amazon. Great read that talks not just about Templeton, about the whole area and this whole story in really nice depth and detail, more than I'm going to be able to give you right now. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. It's called Gentlemen Bootleggers, and I no connection to that guy. It's just a great read. And if you like this part of the story, read the book. It's really cool. But that, once again, that's that guy named Joe Earlbeck. He's the guy. He was the kingpin. People were making whiskey for him. And one of the guys' name was Alphonse Kirchhoff, was one of the setters that made whiskey, that was made really good whiskey for him. Alphonse's grandson, Keith Kirchhoff, and Merle Kirchhoff, his son, were the two guys from Iowa, from the area, that helped start the distillery, along with another fellow named Scott Bush. And that's where we used to lean on we use the Kirchhoff recipe. Well, we don't use the Kirchhoff recipe, right? The Kirchhoff recipe was that traditional one, which I was telling you about, which was sugar, yeast, water with a little bit of rye. Guess what? Honestly, that's rum by today's standards, or a spirit.
Right.
So we make our whiskey to honor that. And that's where that whole story comes in, is all of those people in the town, no one lost their farms, no one lost their homes. They found a way during post-World War I, during Prohibition, during a farm crisis, and even up through the Great Depression. They kept food on the table. They provided for their families. I mean, this is a horrible way of describing this, but it's not, it's really sexy to think about prohibition and bootlegging. That's a sexy concept. But what's not sexy is talking about like people who today might make like make meth, you know, you know, it was not looked upon favorably back in the day, and that's probably a little extreme to use that analogy, but you know what I'm saying. It was risky. It was legitimately risky. It was totally illegal, and people did it to survive. That's where small town strong spirit comes from.
Question 3, drink 3. What are we drinking?
We are drinking one of our newest innovations. And this is something fun that we come out with annually. So this is Templeton Stout Cask Finished Rye. So, and that's what it says on it. It's just Stout Cask Finished. So I'll give you all the extra details. And going forward, we've talked to marketing. I think we're going to call out like when we finish our whiskeys, what it's finished in, and kind of have that kind of info. Okay. So I'll give you some of those details. This is our Stout Cask Finish, but I want to give you a little history on this particular SKU, which is we first came out with the maple. We then did a Caribbean rum finish. Yep. Last year we did an Oloroso sherry finish, and then this year we did the stout finish. So we only do, if you're catching on, we do one finish a year annually. We do a limited production, usually around 3,000 to 4,000 cases, depending on how many barrels we get of whatever we finish it in. And for those who don't understand finishing, we used our 6-year rye, so that exact same one. So it's fun to try these side by side. Okay. So actually, go ahead and try this right away while you still have that 6 in your brain.
I was going to say, I wish I would have not drank it all now. Like so.
So you'll notice this is very dark. Matter of fact, I think it's the darkest whiskey of all the ones we've got, right?
Yeah, it is. So,
and the reason why is, so what we did with this is we used our 6-year rye, which is already a kind of a dark expression for us. We bought from Founders Brewery, which we didn't call out on this, and I wish we had, but Founders Brewery in Michigan makes something called KBS, their Kentucky Breakfast Stout, which is a imperial stout beer. So it's a really stout beer put into bourbon barrels, and it's brewed with coffee and chocolate. And then it's aged in those bourbon barrels. So high proof, high ABV beer. We bought those barrels from them wet. So which is how you want them. You want them moist, you know, you want those flavors to impact. Took those barrels, put our 6-year whiskey in it for 3.5 months. And this is what you get. So the one thing about our finishes is if you go back, so I mentioned our first release was a maple. And I think when people see maple on a whiskey, they assume immediately, well, it's going to taste like maple syrup, right? It's going to be super sweet. I like to use that as an example. We do our finishes, and this is included in it. We still finish them dry. We're about nuanced flavors. We're not about, we didn't want a maple sugar bomb in that case, right? With this, we didn't want an imperial stout beer bomb. We could do that if we want to.
Sure.
All you do is you let that stay in contact as long as possible, and then you release the product. We did not want that. We're about subtle, nuanced flavors. So with this, remember we had those buttered popcorn notes, brown sugar with that 6-year, kind of a burnt sugar kind of quality to it. Now you're going to jump into, you actually can taste without it being overboard. And you can smell it. You get those kind of cocoa notes.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very chocolatey.
Yep, it's almost like for me, it's like cocoa nibs. So it's of a more bitter chocolate, but when you drink it, it's more of a sweeter cocoa kind of flavor.
Okay.
So if you're a rye freak, you're bummed out because the rye doesn't pop. It doesn't, the spice doesn't jump out of this. I get bourbon drinkers who are like, I hate rye. And then I give them this and they're like, ooh, I could drink that.
Yeah.
They can drink all of our finished products because what it does is if you're drinking rye that's been finished, typically that finish tends to make it a little more subtle. And then you take in, we're good at grabbing those sweet flavors. Lester Brown is he is one of the best damn master distillers. I think it's his strongest suit. So not only can he blend really well, but when he gets a hold of barrels like this and does our finishes, he knows when that optimal and that prime time is. And I think he nailed it with this. We did an experiment at the distillery using Toppling Goliath Brewery, which we love. It's an Iowa brewery. They gave us some phenomenal barrels. We made one that was like so it was an earlier version of this where we made less than, I think we made like 790 bottles of it. It was the opposite of this. It was just malty and huge. We will do things like that at the distillery, right? For distillery releases. When we go broad market, we want it to be like this. We want you to taste the beer, understand that this is, you can taste malty notes in this, right? You get a maltiness out of that. I get malt, I get chocolate. I get a little bit of those, those rye, butterscotch, a little bit of pepper in there, a little bit of mint, but it's subtle. That is in the background. But it's really smooth. And if you're catching on, smooth is what I want to emphasize. You're going to find that everything we drink today, and that's not always the case with rye products, is these are ultra smooth.
That's nice. And you get a lot of the cocoa. You're right. The cocoa nib, the malt. Yeah.
If you let this sit in your glass, because you just poured it, if you let it sit, you'll get more chocolatey notes. And eventually, actually, if this like sits out, it starts to take on some maple qualities. You actually get like a little maple in the nose,
okay,
which tricks you to translating on your palate. But you have to let it. And I can only tell you that because I've had product, like I've been drinking this and it's like sat out and I'm like, oh, I'll go back and I'll have some of that. It's like, oh shit. There's like, now it evolves, right? It's turning into this like little maple treat, as well as the chocolate and the cocoa, which doesn't go away, and that malty character, which is what you want. Not everybody's a stout fan or a beer fan. But I think it's a knockout and it's just fun. I'll take a step back. I won't call it a knockout. I think it's a really fun, different expression that we do, which is that's what our cask series is all about. Our cask series is always about just doing something fun. It's always going to be a finished product. I won't let the cat out of the bag, or maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not buzzed enough, I guess, yet. But next news. Marketing can get mad at me, but we're going to do a tequila finished.
Oh, nice.
Product. And we experimented with it at the distillery. We're going to release our little experiment here probably in the next few months. It's my favorite finish, and I'm a snob when it comes to tequila. I don't love tequila. I have to drink super premium to really enjoy it. But when I find really good tequila, I really enjoy it. And we partnered with Coralejo.
Okay.
And we used their extra añejo. And good golly, we got these phenomenal honey notes is what I get out of it. I mean, it's so killer. But my point is, just like this, subtle, integrated, super smooth, but the rye takes a step back. That spice does not pop out of this, and it never will a product like that.
Would you guys be one of the first people to finish a rye in tequila? Like I've never even, because
honestly, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I mean, I know like Bareface out of Canada, they have a tequila cask, and also JJ Corey out of Ireland also has a tequila cask, which I absolutely love. Like it's one of my favorites. But like I've never even heard of like a rye being finished, so I'm super excited for that. So
you'll love it. And so when I tease people with that a little bit here and there, they're like, most people, I'd say 90%, the reaction is like, ooh, okay, because most people aren't like excited about tequila, right? And then you think of tequila and whiskey. That is not a natural combination in your head. But I'm just telling you right now, it makes sense. I'll take it a step further.
I'm down. Like I am a person in the cult. So like I am down for that. Yeah. Like, but yeah,
you're gonna love it. So we did a barrel exchange with them.
Okay.
So they're gonna actually do, I believe, a Coralejo tequila that's Templeton finished.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And here's the thing. So there was a small bottling Coralejo got barrels from us several years ago and did a 5-year extra añejo. I think it sells for like $300 a bottle. Okay. Tequila. I should have brought it up here. It is fucking, sorry, but it's fucking amazing. So anyways, I hope that we can honor them and do something special back. So.
All right. So then question 3, like we said, we usually call this the talking shit segment.
All right.
So again, we met at a whiskey fest, and we got to tie that into some things. And again, you are a traveling man. You're all over the country talking about rye. What is the one thing that you enjoy about going to a festival, and then also the one thing that you dread going to the festival?
We almost touched on both of those, especially the dread. The dread is interacting with people who have overconsumed. First of all, I love going to whiskey festivals because for me, it's, I'm no different than the consumer. I get to explore. I get to find something new. Usually I get a chance ahead of the opening, and we'll use that event as an example, to go to somebody's table and find something I haven't tried before. Yeah. I'm as excited as you are about finding something new. I mean, that's so that part of it is always really, really fun. And I like meeting new people. You're a great example of that. We didn't know each other prior to that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love interacting with the public. I like turning people onto the brand and telling them a lot of, educating people. A lot of people think that they know about every brand that's out there. And the reality is you probably don't know anything about any of the brands until you talk to somebody that's really connected.
Well, I will tell you, when I came up to you guys up to the booth, you were interacting with 2 ladies, and they were, again, well into their night. They were having a good time. But you I just sat in the corner and just watched you, and again, you were very personable and just really just talking. It showed that you loved what you were doing, and I was like, we got to have this dude on the show. So that was the big thing. So
thank you. On that note, though, it's once you've gone just beyond, and I can't tell you about the 2 ladies. I don't know, I couldn't tell you that moment, but there is that point where I've had guys who have San Francisco was the last one I did, right? And great guy, he's there, but he's got his girlfriend propped up. I mean, she can't stand on her own, right? It's the end of the night. We're trying to have an honest conversation. He's actually sober enough to have a conversation, but his girlfriend needs a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
That's when it's like, all right, I don't need this.
Yeah.
So that's what I hate the most. But I can tolerate the guys who come up and they're like, to what we were talking about earlier, what do you have anything that's over? I don't drink anything that's not 120 proof plus. And I've honestly had people come up to me like, well, guess what? I don't. So, and I'm not a dick about it, right? Yeah. But that's those guys. I could easily get hung up on those kinds of people, but I get it. Everybody's got their preferences. Everybody's got their likes and dislikes, and I try to honor all that. It's the drunkards. It's the guys and women, both of them, that are just that have overconsumed and want to have a really bad conversation.
Yeah.
Other than that, I love I love those whiskeys.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do.
On to question 4, drink 4. What are we drinking?
All right. Now it gets exciting. Well, it does for me. You had asked earlier, what's my favorite? And I'm not saying that because it's our oldest age statement, but it's our Templeton 10-year.
Nice.
So it's obviously our most beautiful product. This is an actual metal label. We do a custom metal top on this also. And here, this is for marketing. So if you ever Google or look at the town of Templeton, we have a lot of shots of the town. We have a water tower in Templeton. Okay. This particular cork is actually modeled after it's supposed to be the water tower, right?
Awesome.
To emulate that. So anyways, but this is our Templeton 10-year, and you'll notice this is hard to see too, but there is handwritten up here are the actual barrel numbers. You and I are having the same barrel. Just so
okay.
You know.
I was going to ask. There was my number was 3438. So
that's exactly right.
And I was like, there must have been something for you to write it down. So I was like.
I did not put that on there because I gave you some super and just full disclosure, I didn't give you some amazing barrel that's going to blow your mind. I had a sample of that and I wanted us to have the exact same thing. That's what I used. But that brings up a point, which is if you see Templeton 10-year, know that we taste everything. All the barrels that go into this program are set aside. They're all single barrel. So we actually put that number on there. There's a reason for it. And if it doesn't make the cut, it's not part of our 10-year program.
Okay.
So that's a really important point, because it would be really easy for us to go, wow, we've aged this product 10 years. Let's just put it out on the market, because, you lose half the barrel just at Angel share, right? That's literally, we have about a 50% loss with our 10-year product. So you want to get the most out of that whiskey, but we don't do that. We will, that gets repurposed in something completely different. And I'll tell you, it's very rare, but we've done it. We've had a situation where we've tried a barrel or two, and you're tasting it. It's 10-year. You've got all that loss, it's the dark, beautiful color. You taste it. And if you were tasting it blind, you would swear it was 4-year.
Okay.
And that's not a flaw in the whiskey. It's a flaw of the barrel. So that has everything to do with the oak that it was aged in. But we won't use that product for that. So we'll that goes out of the program. That's an extreme example, but same thing with flavor profiles. If it's just not worth, because this is a $90 price point. By the way, the stout cask that we had prior is about $45 roughly.
Okay.
And I'm talking in generalities. This is $90 a bottle. This is another phenomenal. It's not another best value, but I would say it is another phenomenal value. It's hard to find 10-year rye single barrel in this price point. I mean, shit, Michter's is, I think, 160 to 180.
I was gonna say 180 at least here in New York. So yeah.
And it's a great product. Matter of fact, I tried it at the same event that we were at, as a matter of fact. I liked this every bit as much at a $90 price point. Not knocking that, because I really actually like that 10-year rye as well. But the whole point is single barrel 10-year rye is harder to find. And at this price point, I think we over deliver.
I guess, again, we've talked about price point. Where do people do you sell online, or are you so we're in all 50 states. We're a global company now. So when we started off, we were this humble little, we were a shack of a place, right? We were a little finishing facility in Templeton, Iowa. We were one building. We had people from the town that were hand labeling. All we were doing we were finishing the whiskeys, and we're cutting them with water, proofing them, and bottling them. Today we are a full campus. We're a huge production facility. We have a beautiful 3-story column still from Forsyths and pot still. We're really proud of our stills. We have I think we're at about 42,000 barrels. We had to build a second warehouse. And I'm just saying that we've gone from this humble little company to we're legitimate. To answer your question, we're in all 50 states now, and we're around 30 other countries plus, and working on that too. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, but I don't want to get off in 10-year, because we gotta talk.
Yeah,
about
no,
it, right?
that's because again, this just smells.
All right, so
fucking glorious. Like this,
right?
Is amazing.
This is rocking. So every bottle's different. So this is, like I said, and I'm not shitting you. I didn't pick some, and I have a few bottles that I guess I could have played that game with. Yeah, I wanted to. Here was my philosophy. I wanted to pick a bottle and not have any agenda behind it and put it out there, because I really believe in this product. And that's what you got. So when I'm tasting this and smelling this right now, because we're doing this at the same time, actually. 104 proof.
Oh, wow.
This one, every bottle shows a little differently, but all of them from a quality standpoint meet our standards. And what that means is it needs to taste like a $90 bottle. Some of them, first of all, are you getting that finish? It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It just keeps
going. Yeah.
This one up front shows you those barrel notes. I get that toasty barrel. I get that rye spice right away in this particular bottle. Some of them, my favorites, and everything's subjective in the tasting world, right? I love it when we get these super spicy cinnamon and eucalyptus, or spearmint.
I I'm
whiskey.
totally getting the spearmint. Like that
And
is, yeah.
It's in there. It's in there. This is the whiskey where you start to taste mint with us, especially.
No, it's again, it doesn't drink at 104, so like it doesn't. The nose itself, like I mean, my full beak is way in there, and
Right.
I am like I'm just keep getting flavor upon flavor. Oh.
So it go once again, and I keep using this term, and I don't want to overuse it, but it is accurate, which is smooth.
Yeah.
We make a really smooth rye, and that is something we strive to do. We want this rye to be accessible.
Awesome. All right. So question 4. You guys opened the distillery 2016, expanded in 2018, not looking for industry secrets, but what's next?
Okay, great question. I wasn't expecting you to ask that question, actually.
Breaking news.
Bourbon is next.
Okay.
So the one thing about us is we were, like I used the term one trick pony earlier, right? We had 2 SKUs forever, 4-year for several years. Then we came out with in 2016, same year we did that 10-year release, we came out with our 6-year. That's not very long ago if you really think about it. So what people don't realize about us is how much we are innovating now. Different finishes. We're not messing around with mash bills. And keep in mind, we were purchasing from MGP, and now we're doing our own distillate. Just so everyone knows, we are the same mash bill. We're a 95.5 rye mash bill. Just to speak to that really quickly, our Iowa distillate is fucking amazing. I cannot wait to unleash it on the world. And I'm also not dogging the MGP, because we absolutely love what we have in stock. And most people understand that and understand the importance of what MGP brings to the table. But I will tell you, our Iowa distillate arguably is better. But with that, what's coming, you're going to see more innovations from us. We've done some canned cocktails just recently. We're going to do different finishes. We're going to do different things with rye. I hope we mess around with our mash bills. We aren't currently, but bourbon is our next big innovation that you're going to see. And I'm giving you a real ahead of the curve secret here. So we're looking for about a 2025 release. Our bourbon is about 4 years old, though. So people don't realize that's why we had to build another rick house. So going back to this picture, if you look at this side's all rye. That side is mostly up in here. The half of that room is bourbon. And so we've got quite a bit of bourbon on hand.
Wow.
The bourbon is amazing. We could release our bourbon today. It's ready for market, but we really want it to be a special product. So we're going to wait till 2025 to release that.
That's awesome.
So that's what's next. And
Awesome.
because if you're at Templeton, you look around, it's like, it's corn everywhere. Why aren't you making bourbon, right? And here's the cool thing. We're using family corn from one of our founders, Keith Kirchhoff. So it's his family corn, his brother, and his other family members. They're all farmers by trade. So we're using their corn, as well as some of the farms that are right around us. So that's a really cool part of our story when it comes to bourbon.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, when you show me that picture, all I really kind of see is that you have a floor whiskey problem too. So like
right. Exactly right.
Well, that's awesome. Again, so 2025, something to look forward to. That's amazing.
It's around the same time that I think, just to let people know, it's probably the same time that you'll see Templeton Iowa Rye too.
All right. So on to question 5, drink 5.
Drink 5 is our Templeton barrel strength. So we started this whole conversation off with, let's drink 80 proof, the importance of drinking low proof. But as we've been drinking, we've been jumping up in proofs. So we're not anti-high proof, obviously. So this is our barrel strength 2022. And if people are shopping for our barrel strength product, first of all, barrel strength, this is our first one in our new package. All of our other barrel strengths prior to this are in that bottle that you can see behind me up there on the shelf. We started in 2018. Our 2018 and 2019 were 4-year product. Our 2020 was the first time we blended 3 different age statements together. We did a 5-year base a little 4-year and a little 6-year. And this in 2021, we had to, because of COVID, something had to get chopped off of in the distillery. Barrel strength is what it was.
Okay.
So 2022, which we just released a few months ago, was our latest release. And this some days can be my favorite product, but 10-year is truly my favorite. But a lot of people say, I love your barrel strength the most. But I can't wait for you to drink this, because this is, just so you know, so like I said, 4-year, then we did a combination of 5, 4, and 6-year. This is a combination of 6-year at the base, 40% 6-year, 30% 5-year, 20% 4-year, and it's the first year we put 10-year in there. We did 10% 10-year to round it out. And what I found, but the difference between those, and I love to do vertical tastings with our barrel strength, because it shows you with that product how different those are. Because those are basically really small batches. We also do a very limited run on that. We don't make barrel strength all year round. We do it once a year. So it comes out, when it's gone, never to be seen again. So this year's barrel strength is probably maybe our smoothest. And I think it's because it's got 10-year in it. In terms of, if you're tasting this next to the 10-year, I did it at that event. I do it at large whiskey events, because you got to put both those products out there. But I don't like to taste these two items side by side, because I feel that they compete with one another. So as a consumer, my point is that you're probably, if you like 10-year, you're probably going to love barrel strength and vice versa, right?
I can already tell you. I do. I mean, I haven't even tasted it yet. And the nose on this already is just like, and again, I don't mean this in a bad way, but this smells like a good fucking rye. Like immediately, like
amazing.
You're like, yeah, that's rye. Like that is a good fucking rye right there.
I haven't told you the proof yet, but I can tell you this: in a blind tasting, some people think that 10-year is higher proof than this.
Oh no, this is amazing. Like this just
silky. Holy crap. So you can see where my dilemma is with choosing a favorite. It's like choosing a favorite child, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna let you know it's this one. This one is
okay. That's totally fair. I get it 100%. So, do you want to guess the proof?
110.
It's a good guess. That's a 114.6, so almost 115.
Okay.
So our barrel strength, when we put out barrel strength, it's going to be a range between 112 and 117 at the highest. We've never released a 117. This is, I think, 115.1 or something like that was our highest. That's the thing, is you can really look at Templeton barrel strength and know you're going to get a great product. I want people to know that you can count on it. I'm not telling you it's the same thing every time, and just count on the fact that it's phenomenal and smooth as shit, which is hard to do. It is hard as a rye product to go from our 4-year all the way up to our barrel strength and say smooth, easy drinking, accessible. Bourbon drinkers can enjoy these products. I mean, that is not something you can say with most rye products.
So, question 5 comes down to the Whiskey Wednesday coin. You can flip it, you can spin it, you can do whatever you want. The coin gives us the answer. You don't have to answer unless you feel compelled to answer, but the coin will give us the answer.
I want you to know this is my favorite new thing. I'm going to use this in my life.
Templeton was founded by bootleggers. So if you lived in 1920, would you be a good bootlegger?
I'm going to tell you what the coin says before I show you, and then I'm going to tell you what I say.
Better say fuck yeah.
It says fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, it does. I was going to say fuck yeah. And I was going to say, but I'd be an extremely good consumer.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us. That's 5 drinks down, 5 questions answered, 5 really great rye drinks consumed. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And cheers to you. And again, if you're ever in New York City, let's actually go out and drinking like together. So, and if I'm in Iowa, I'm going to come look you up. So cheers.
You have to. Cheers to you, Tim. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.